and welcome to 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking three powerful questions. I'm your host, Rachel Vogel, and joining me for tonight's episode is John Franck, the co-founder and owner of Undercover Entertainment. John has been at the forefront of independent music for over 20 years. He's held senior executive positions as the head of marketing, business development, and digital commerce at a variety of companies, and most recently, he was the executive vice president of commerce and marketing at ADA Warner Music Group and the chief marketing officer at 300 Entertainment, a startup he joined at its formation. He's been recognized by Billboard in 2021 and 2020 as an indie power player, and in 2019, he was recognized as a digital power player. He's worked with a wide range of artists and influencers, including DJ Khaled, Migos, Cheat Codes, Young Thug, St. John, Dixie D'Amelio, Papa Roach, Fetty Wap, AJR, and many, many others. So, John, thanks so much for being here. Excited to have you on the podcast. Are you ready to get started?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Let's do it.
Imagine for a second you are sitting down with your 25-year-old self. What one piece of advice would you give him on a personal note? And what one piece of advice would you give him from a business perspective?
Okay, I love this question. So it's funny, when we initially connected, shortly after we connected, I happened to trip on a Kevin Spacey interview on TV. I was kind of aimlessly looking through my YouTube suggested videos. And for whatever reason, it led me down a rabbit hole to a movie that he had started many, many years ago called Swimming with Sharks. And in that film, he plays this like terrible Hollywood agent named Buddy Acker. And Buddy Acker is like this like tormentor of his assistant, who in the movie is named Guy. And there's this brutal scene where Buddy Acker, played by Kevin Spacey, walks out of his office and he finds out that two other really important people called him during a meeting where he said, "Hold all my calls." And that conversation devolves into Buddy Acker telling his assistant to shut up, listen, and learn. Now, thinking back to my younger self when I was 25 years old and starting out in the business, I think that is actually a great mantra. So I'll explain. When you're coming up in the business, and it's dramatically changed in the last 2 decades, it seems to change pretty much every couple of years now, given the technology sea change that happens. I would say for my 25-year-old self, at a time when there was no difference between my personal life and my professional life, because all I wanted to do leading up to that moment is just be a part of a label, being close to an artist, a management company, going to shows. It was an all-encompassing dream that I had at the time. So because there was no separation between church and state, so to speak, between my professional and personal life, and I was living on 27th Street in a tiny railroad apartment, I really lived it, and that was like my whole life. But looking back at it now, what I would say is the most important thing is try to be somebody that really listens to what's happening around you. When you enter into a label structure or a management or a booking agency situation, wherever life may take you, really take the time to observe people that are around you, especially the executives. Take in as much as you can and learn about how they communicate with their staff. What are they saying? What are they not saying? What are they saying between the lines? How do they manage people? All those things, while, in the baby phase of your career feels like, well, it's nice and all. As you grow as a professional, you end up taking a number of those things and making them your own. Whether they are positive experiences, negative experiences, indifferent experiences, they are so critically important. The captain obvious things are, make yourself essential to whatever you're doing, work as hard as you can, learn as much as you can about whatever role that you're being thrust into. In a nutshell, make yourself indispensable. But the first part of what I talked about is will have, as you go through life in your career, will have a massive influence on how you actually deal with people and how you eventually, as you hopefully grow as a professional, manage people once you get to that point in your career. So I think that's my answer.
Great answer. Yeah, I think that's a really great perspective. I agree with you. I feel like as younger professionals are getting started, they don't pay as much attention to like the management styles of their leaders and how the department handles challenges, but those are all the things that you're going to use when you move up in the world.
100%.
So I am curious to know, you've held several positions at an executive level across different companies. Do you feel like all of that led you to finally launching your own company? Is that something that you always wanted to do, or did it kind of just happen?
Kind of happened by accident, to be honest with you. But I will say my experience at 300, where I was fortunate enough to be a part of a company that was building from the ground up, and that was a true startup in the most entrepreneurial way possible, I think prepared me for having my own kind of boutique agency. And I will say it's something that you really want to try to do because it's like anybody who's been an entrepreneur, it's feast or famine. There's great months, there are challenging months, and all that kind of stuff. But I think even more so than that, my different skill sets that I acquired over the years, I was fortunate enough to be part of a handful of independent labels where I held different roles and really kind of absorbed a number of different parts of what was happening at the company at the time. It's a little bit like opening up the engine of a car and understanding how all the parts connect. I think the one advantage you have of being at a small independent structure is that you actually have a front row seat to those things. Sometimes when you're in a much bigger building with hundreds of people, compartments are decentralized and you're kind of off in a corner kind of doing your thing. When you're indie, you have to kind of figure out a way to make all the parts connect. And when you leave that structure, you're now on your own and you have to be able to pull in other people to help you do things. There's no way to be a lone wolf in the independent boutique marketing world. So the thing that I love about it is because of those experiences, whether it was being a content creator, being part of A&R biz dev conversations, being a straight marketing guy, working in radio promotion and whatnot, you acquire all these skills and you throw them into a blender. And then when you go indie, you can actually figure out on your own how to build a structure for a number of different clients. What's interesting about our business is Undercover has clients where we literally serve as a virtual record label for them. We are a marketing department for hire, right? So that's one bucket. We have other businesses where we do very one specific thing, whether it is high level marketing advisement, biz dev, some sort of A&R consulting. It's a menu of items. This kind of company is referred to as a services company within these, distribution structures. I'm personally allergic to that word. I look at this more as like marketing partners to any client that wants to work with us, whether it is another management company, whether it is an artist that we work with directly, whether it's a record label or even a booking agency, it doesn't really matter to us. But yeah, all those things really kind of quote unquote prepare you for life as an indie. And I will say no day in our, at our company now is ever the same day. There is no repetition of the day before because every day there is a different thing that you're trying to problem solve. Every artist in the world has different needs. Some have seasoned managers, some have no managers, and so forth and so on. So you have to really try to figure out how to problem solve these things like a Rubik's Cube with your eyes closed. And sometimes it's really challenging, but it's also really fun.
So, real quick before we jump into the next question, I feel like maybe even 5 years ago, a lot of executives, when they're looking to hire somebody, maybe they really want to focus on somebody who has been in the same department, let's say, like worked in marketing every single job that they've ever had in their whole life. Now, if let's say you were looking to hire somebody, would you prefer them to still have all the experience in kind of the same category, or do you think that it's super important to be well-rounded? Let's say somebody worked in A&R, worked in commerce, worked in marketing, touched all these different things, or do you think it just depends on the company and the situation?
What a great question. I love that question. So the answer to that really, Rachel, is finding people that are intellectually curious. And at the end of the day, you don't have to know everything. I don't know anything ever by any stretch of the imagination. I'm constantly Googling things or asking myself questions out loud that I don't know the answer to. So when we are looking to hire people, and at the moment we have, we have 4 young professionals that work with us who know a million things that I don't know. And that's great. and I know things that maybe they don't know. And we complement each other, and I constantly learn things from them. And maybe what they know is complemented by us being able to give them context around things and give them mentorship and explain experiences. The thing that I also bestow, and maybe I should have answered this in part one, is that the music community is actually a village. It is not a big community. The idea is that there's thousands and thousands of people that do this. The record label structure side, which in the file sharing years, it shrunk to half its size prior to that, right? You will absolutely bump into the same people over and over and over. And relationships are really everything in the business. And it's something that I try to impart on the younger people that we hired. And part of the intellectual curiosity has to be their desire and ability to forge their own relationships. People that come to work for us, they have access to my quote unquote contact list and Rolodex. I don't gate any of those things. I want those young professionals to create their own relationships and learn things from people that I also have relationships with. But we're careful about making sure that the people that we bring on have those personalities. Yes, it's always great if we're finding people that have very specific skill sets that can help our business. Sure. I also feel that generationally, anybody that is, under the age of 21 is born with a phone in their hand. So their natural intuition to understand platforms and playlists and social media and influencer marketing and all these different things is kind of already in their DNA, even if they don't actually know it or haven't asked themselves the question of like, hey, how do these two things connect? You know what I mean? They already know the answer, but it might be kind of like a subliminal answer. Those things are fun to kind of work through. And then there's other parts of the business too, which, in the physical years really kind of dictated the business, whether it was radio promotion or press and those kinds of things, where some of these things may feel completely alien to a younger generation, because I don't know anybody that listens to the radio that is under the age of, like, I don't want to date myself, but having two kids, I can't remember the last time they actually mentioned the word radio station, even if we're in the car together. So again, going back to the original question, intellectual curiosity, super, super important. The right DNA.
I think that's a really unique perspective. Okay, moving on to the next question. Every industry has its dirty little secrets, and we all know that's no different in the music industry. Sometimes people think that's a bad thing, but that's not always the case. Sometimes they can be good. What's one secret you would like to share with our listeners about the industry?
I'm going to focus on two things, and they're both kind of obvious, but I think they're both important. I think the first thing is everyone's trying to figure it out. The concept that somebody knows something the other person knows, and man, I woke up and had imposter syndrome this morning. Everybody has it. And I will say this, having had the great luxury of having sat in marketing meetings all over the world, whether those meetings take place in London or Nashville or Milan or LA. It's so funny. You go to these meetings, and the only difference between these meetings is really the cast of characters in the meeting. Everyone's asking the same questions and trying to figure out solution to these problems, which is, how do we help the artists? How do we elevate their artistry? How do we get people to pay attention? How do we cut through the clutter? How do we get into the slipstream of people's minds so they pay attention and they give a shit? That's really kind of the headline, right? That's one thing I can't overemphasize enough, because I've literally gotten off airplanes and flown 4,000 miles and walked into a meeting with 30 people I've never met. So I'm the random guy in the meeting, and I'm like, wait, I just had this meeting in New York a week ago with 30 different people that are trying to kind of figure out the answer to these same questions. So everyone ideally is looking to each other to get to the answer. I think that's one thing that people assume, well, Interscope and Republic are the hottest labels in the world. They know everything, right? And maybe they do, but maybe they don't. You know what I mean? The other thing that I'd like to share is, which is a secret, but not really a secret. The harsh reality of the record business, it's a completely illogical business. I can't think of any business at least that I'm aware of, where the overwhelming number of things fail, and they fail to a level that is spectacular. So if you think about the concept of, okay, whoever you believe, 60,000 tracks a day, 80,000 tracks a day, 40,000 tracks a day, which now is like a tsunami of music that's coming out every week. Even prior to that, in physical years, when the business was putting out 5,000 albums a year, which now seems like that's like nothing, is the large majority of those things never work out, right? And so that is the heartbreak of the business, and it's also the tough lessons of the business. And I'll never forget this. I was fortunate, one of my first jobs ever, to work at Sony Music as an assistant. And this was when the physical years were booming, without dating myself. And we had artists that were literally selling, I mean, just numbers now that just seem unfathomable, right? Hundreds of thousand units a day, like something kind of crazy, right? But we also had artists on the label that literally were begging for tour support to go tour in a van. And we would have marketing meetings talking about the gigantic artist and the artist that's touring in a van, who was like, can I please have an extra $1,000 so over the course of a tour, my front of house guy can get his own hotel room, like that kind of stuff. And the disparity between those two things, me coming into the business knowing absolutely nothing of nothing, I was like, this is like insane, right? Like in one meeting, we're talking about we're going to spend $750,000 on the video. It may not be great, so we might scrap it. And then we're talking in the 10 minutes later about the band touring in the van with the $1,000 that their manager is begging for, right? And it's kind of shocking. So my point is, even from my very early steps in the business, I was like, wow, this doesn't make any kind of sense. And then as time went by, you come to realize that the successes, right? And you sit in a building that has some of the greatest artists on the planet, whether it's Ed Sheeran or 21 Pilots or Cardi B, like the list is kind of endless, right? But then you look at the sheer number of artists that are in that system, and you're like, wait a second, Bruno Mars, for every Bruno Mars, there might be the Lizzos that haven't become Lizzo yet. So that's tough, and then you realize that some things don't make it, even if they're great. And there is always a laundry list of reasons as to why that happens. And sometimes those are hard truths for people to learn, especially when you're young, coming up in the business.
Final question. Throughout your career, I can only imagine you've been asked plenty of questions, whether it was for an industry conference, the media, or even a promotion. But throughout all of those interviews and all of those questions, there has to be one that you've never been asked but would have liked to. So what is that question, and what would be your answer?
The thing that I've almost never been asked, and this always kind of makes me scratch my head, is the path to success and the path to failure of a project or projects. Well, let me explain, right? If you're fortunate enough to be around an artist that, cracks the slipstream of popular culture, that's the greatest gift there is. And that's really why that's kind of the drug of the business, right? To quote Leor. And at the end of the day, you come to realize that, those things don't happen very often. And the thing that I'm always curious about is whether I'm, interviewing somebody or, meeting with interns or doing fireside chats or any of those kinds of things. I never get asked, like, give me the roadmap of how it actually happened, because no roadmap is ever the same. And you see it now happening in front of you in live time, right? With some of the greatest marketing minds of our time that you get to talk to every week, right? And I never get asked that question. And I'm always hoping someone's going to say, okay, you worked with fill in the blank. How did it get from point A to point Z? Right? And what were the levers or the moments of fortune and good luck that happened along the way that created the path? Similarly to failures, where you think about, man, how could this ever fail? And why did it fail? Whether it was a function of had a huge viral moment, but somehow the viral moment did not translate into consumption, whether there was a combination of virality, sync, radio, and those things were like a nothing burger and so forth and so on. I never get asked that question, and I think there are so many things you can learn from that, and as a young person coming up to business, those are like micro case studies that I think are important to learn from. And every once in a while, you read about these things in the trades, right? Where it's like the marketing team behind such and such did such and such. But then when you read those things, they're so generalist that they don't actually give you the answer. And I am more than happy to give you the answer, whether it is a good answer or an answer you don't want to hear. And sometimes the thing that kind of cracks me up too, and leave you with this, is that, this is a business and I guess life in general, and entertainment in general, where people love to take credit for shit. Yo, I did this whole thing, right? Let me be really clear. No one person breaks an artist ever. Okay. And especially on a global level, breaking an artist on a global level requires people in multiple territories around the world talking with each other and communicating with each other with the singular goal of elevating this artist. Like, this is a tremendous amount of work, right? And sometimes you do all those things, but it doesn't work out. And there is a reason for that. So it's a very long-winded way of saying, I'd love to get asked that question every once in a while and impart what I know, and maybe it's helpful or not helpful.
Yeah, what's the quote? It's like it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's funny. I always think of this quote Julie Greenwald gave years ago. She said something that was so spot on. She said that, back in the ownership physical years, you could do a handful of things and do them well. And even if you had an okay record, you could have a gold record. Get them on TV, get them on the radio, get a good press look, get a sync, all the kind of obvious things. And then now you have to do 100 things just to get people to pay attention. And it doesn't mean that it's going to work. So it's kind of like my whole point about that, and going back to the intellectually curious portion of the conversation.
All right. Well, it's about time we close out tonight's episode. But John, thanks again for joining me. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Rachel, and good luck.
Thank you. And to everyone listening, hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. Stay tuned for next week of 3Q, where we interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking 3 powerful questions. See you next time.